Hi there. Thank you for coming today to the next interview in the series for dog owners to help you discover the secret of dog experts and transform your connection to create the best friend you've always wanted. Today, I'm very honored to have Dr. Juliane Kaminski. She's just an amazing dog expert to add to this series for sure. She has studied, dedicated many years to the comparative psychology with dogs and humans, and has just done many articles and studies. Actually, really working on the studies and learning all about dogs' face and understanding. And I know she can explain it way better than I can. And I'm so glad you're here. Thank you, Juliana. I wonder if you could just go a bit into what brought you to studying and realizing that there was all this interest in facial movement and contact and connecting, communicating, I guess it is, right?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in dog-human communication. So I'm really interested in how dogs communicate with humans and how humans actually understand that. And so there are many ways that dogs can communicate, obviously. So and there are many ways that we can communicate to dogs. So we can communicate via vocal communication, so making sounds. We can communicate through body posture and gestures and all these kinds of things like visual information. And we can also communicate through our faces. And so I was really interested in understanding to some extent how dogs interpret what's going on in our faces, but also very much interested in understanding what's actually going on in dogs' faces and how we interpret that, and whether we might be sometimes wrong in how we are interpreting that, and how we could find better ways in studying what dogs are trying to communicate with their faces.
It's so interesting. Just from looking at your articles and more, and realizing how much more involved it is with dogs, like much more than I thought.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess what we can see is that, yes, obviously we know that already, that dogs do a lot with their faces. So there's a lot going on. But I guess what we are trying to find out is what it actually means to some extent. So what are they trying to communicate to us, I guess. So if I take one example, so we are really interested in an eyebrow movement that dogs produce when they're looking at humans. So I think we all know that. So dogs create this really very cute looking puppy dog kind of face, where they raise their eyebrows and have this really typical dog look that we all know and adore and really fall in love with. And we got really interested in that movement because we thought, okay, could it be that dogs actually know that they look cute? So could it be that dogs produce this because they want to win us over, because they kind of understand to some extent that it has this effect on us? What we found is that dogs do produce this movement more when we actually look at them. So when we are attentive and when our attention is directed at them, and they produce it much less when we are oriented away, when we are not looking at them, when we are not attentive. So at least our attention seems to play a role. So they seem to kind of take this into account. So she's looking, so I'm doing more with my face, or she's not looking, so I don't have to do that much with my face. But that still doesn't necessarily mean that they have learned that it really does something to us. So we are, at the moment, we are actually trying to find that out. So we are really interested in whether or not they really have learned it has an effect on us. So that's something that I'm studying at the moment.
Oh, is that ever interesting? Because the more I watched, I mean, I've been studying them for years too, and I just find the more dogs you look at, the different ones, and looking at different actions and and also the relationships of people, like you say, with their dog. right? Whether they're going to give those reactions more or not when they get noticed, like you said, excuse me,
Yeah, no, I think I'm really interested in the dog-human relationship for many reasons, and my main reason is because I'm interested in evolution, and I'm interested in how kind of evolution affects us, and how domestication, which is a special process of evolution, affected dogs. So I'm really interested in that. And I'm really interested in the dog-human relationship because we've been together for such a long time. So dogs and humans have lived together for more than 30,000 years. And we think that in that time, dogs have really kind of figured us out. So they really learned to respond to our communication. They really are specially, we call it like specially adapted, which means we think that domestication has really selected them to be better in reading our communication and in reading what we are doing with our bodies and in reading our gestures and all these kinds of things. So in my research over the years, I've really found that dogs respond to our gestures, for example, to a very simple gesture that we use all the time, the pointing gesture. So pointing to something. Dogs use that better than any other animal, so including other domesticated species. So dogs are really, really good in reading these kinds of gestures that we produce. And we think that that's a result of domestication. So that really dogs have kind of evolved over time to read us better.
Yes, and so it's our job to learn, get better at reading them. Look at how
Yes.
hard. So they've actually, like that makes a lot of sense. So over time, they've really gotten to learn how to, well, you say like to understand that the pointing, but humans need to put more into understanding the unique relationships they can have with their dogs, like because a dog is looking, like you say, just even when you point your finger, they're that perceptive.
Yes.
I've never thought of it as, yeah, I guess I have, as a domesticated. Yeah, it's so fascinating.
Yeah, so I think it's but it kind of I think to some extent we take it sometimes for granted, or I think we underestimate sometimes the effect of this. So we in some sense, for me, a dog is ready to be when they, and we think that from the moment they are born, basically they're ready to read us. And they are willing to read us, and they're motivated to read us. They're motivated to engage in this relationship. And I think we sometimes underestimate that. And for me, it's, and I don't want to go into that debate, but I sometimes think that there is so much that we can do with this. So with this kind of domesticated basis for a relationship on which we can build. And it doesn't necessarily need clickers or these kinds of tools, because we have it all in our bodies. We've got the voices that they attend to. And we know that puppies, already very young puppies, are really keen on our high-pitched voices. So when our voices go high, they're like, oh, really attentive. So we've got all the tools that we need to kind of build this relationship. And we think that, yes, dogs have specifically evolved to kind of attend to all these things. But I agree that we also need to look more at the dog side of this relationship. And so what we are doing, for example, when we are looking at facial movements, at dogs' facial expressions, we are really keen to kind of restart the research in this area to some extent, because we see that, unfortunately, I think to some extent, very often in this area, facial movements are interpreted, dogs' facial movements are interpreted in a quite subjective way. So in a very human-oriented kind of way. So we use human emotional terms, like saying, oh, that dog looks sad, or that dog looks happy, or so these very human emotion terms that we are kind of putting on the dog. And I think that has potentially misled us a bit into not really understanding what dogs actually want to say with their facial movements by simply putting these human labels on top of it without really studying. Is that really is it really a sad dog that produces this kind of facial movement, or what does the dog really want to say in this kind of context?
Yeah, it's true. Well, and one that's come up a few times recently in conversations is to do with smiling, and dogs being misunderstood. I know the first time I saw it in a dog, it was like, what is that? You know, especially in a dog I didn't know, because I already had one that I feel that the more you smile at them, the more they can learn to do it. Some seem to do it way more than others, but it can be misinterpreted. And it's so important to really think about what the dog is doing, and not just assume, like you say, not just assume it's bad or mad or, you know, sad. Like,
yes,
it's very misunderstood.
so we developed this system which we call dog FACS. So FACS in this case stands for facial action coding system. So it's based on something that's been developed for humans many years ago. It's called human FACS, and we basically adapted it to dogs. And what this system does, instead of using all these human-oriented subjective terms, it really just looks at muscle movement. So it's basically interpreting muscle movements based on facial movements. So instead of saying this dog looks sad, I'm really looking at the kinds of muscle movements this dog's faces produce. And by doing that, we kind of develop a more objective way of looking at facial movements. And by that, I think we can achieve a real understanding of what is really going on. Because I think these kinds of constantly using these subjective terms is in some sense in the way of a real understanding. We have at the moment not a really good understanding, I think, what dogs actually want to communicate with their faces. And I think we need this kind of more objective approach to systematically study what's really going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Taking all of our, and I'm thinking you're meaning, what I'm understanding is like taking away our emotional feeling and thoughts human wise, and just looking at what's in front of you and what's going on with the dog. And is that what you mean too? Like looking at the whole thing, and
so like
not
really looking at it from the dog's perspective. So let me give you an example. So let's say let's take this eyebrow movement that we are so interested in. So at the moment we think, oh, this is a movement that dogs produce for humans, and it might have a meaning. So we don't know, but we don't know. So what we now need to do is to basically study this movement in context. So we need to simply observe dogs and basically film what they're doing with their faces in all kinds of contexts. So we need to see them when they are interacting with a human. We need to see them when they're interacting with another dog. So one of our ideas is to basically put GoPros on the heads of dogs while they are interacting with each other to see what's going on in their faces when they're actually interacting with each other. And by studying this kind of these movements in different contexts, we can then at some point say, okay, so whenever the dog is in these kinds of contexts, that's when they produce these movements. So then we can make this kind of interpretation of saying, oh, it seems to be context specific. So it seems to be that whenever the dog wants to beg for food, for example, I'm just in these contexts, when the dog wants to beg for food, that's suddenly when they present this movement. So and then we can go to saying that, okay, so it might mean, then we can give it a meaning and say it might actually mean it's a kind of a begging request, or it's a request for food, or a request for attention, or something like that. So I think we need to turn it sort of in some sense upside down again and start a little bit from scratch to kind of get to what we want to have, which is like an ethogram of facial movements in dogs, to really understand what does it really mean. So in what kind of contexts do they produce these different movements?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's so, yeah, you get me thinking. Because I haven't, I mean, I have obviously focused on the face, but I feel like there's probably more there that I could find, like more answers in that facial by studying it over time and learning than I realized. Whereas I know we tend to look at the whole body movement, right? Like drawing back or forward and maybe the paw or stretching a nose out, but there's so much more, you know, or the position of the ears,
Yeah.
you know. I love it. And I think that people, you know, like you say, if I get people to, if everybody can videotape and get the opportunity of seeing what their dog's face looks like in different situations, they can teach them a lot. Yeah, the eyebrows, you got me. Because I've been noticing some dogs recently. I thought I've actually, because one, I know, but this dog went through a bit of a transformation and looking so good and in that happy, more relaxed state, like that face and those eyebrows were just this great big, you know, amazing. And yeah.
No, it's a really strong, it has really, this movement has a really strong effect on us. And I mean, we could even show that people, and I think that was a quite powerful finding. So we could show that dogs that produce that movement get adopted from shelters quicker than dogs that, so the ones that produce that movement more often get adopted quicker than dogs that produce that movement not so often. No other behaviors that the dogs would show when interacting with a strange human had any effect on the adoption rate. So it means that this is a movement that does something to us humans. And it can even, I think it is really powerful for us. So we find it really attractive to the extent that a dog gets adopted quicker just because they move their eyebrows more. So I think this is also important to know and remember that, yes, we think that dogs are really good in engaging with us, in building this relationship, and we are really keen on having this relationship. But sometimes there could also be things that kind of mean we are overlooking other things. So some of these dogs in the shelter, I'm sure, are really, really good dogs. But just because they did not move their eyebrows so much, suddenly they don't get adopted to that extent.
Yeah.
And that is a bit sad. So in some sense, we are also, I think, need to be aware that there are some of our own preferences and things that we find attractive that kind of get in the way of a rational decision or a rational behavior around dogs.
Yeah, it's almost like it's our own judgments or something, you know. It's our own judgments and opinion of what we're interpreting.
Yeah,
And
so we think one reason why we find that movement so attractive is because for humans, so in human conversation, this eyebrow movement is something that we produce when we are sad. So it sort of comes into play when we are sad. And so we think that one reason why we might find it so attractive in dogs is because it kind of triggers this nurturing response of, oh, that's a sad dog. Whereas the dog might not, for the dog, it might mean nothing. You know what I mean? So we don't know actually, but it might not mean that the dog is sad. It just moves its eyebrows. But for us, in our interpretation of this movement, if we would see it in another human's face, we would interpret this as a sad face, and we would interpret this as something that we need to respond to in a kind of nurturing way. And we think that might have triggered, in some sense, the evolution of this eyebrow movement, which, by the way, we cannot see in wolves. So this is a new development that we can only see in dogs. So dogs' closest living relatives, wolves, do not have the muscle that would even produce that movement. So we see that muscle only in dogs.
I didn't know. I was actually thinking of asking you that because I wondered
Yes.
about that. Oh, so they don't do it at all. They don't have the same muscle even, eh?
They don't have the muscle that can sort of produce that movement to that same extent. So they can do a bit of this, but they can't do the full inverted kind of eyebrow movement that the dogs do. This kind of really sad face. And this is really interesting because other than that, the facial muscle anatomy of dogs and wolves is almost identical. So it's only around the eyes, and especially this movement or this muscle that produces this movement, that's the one that we find in dogs, but not in wolves. So we think that humans must have selected for that, whether they did so consciously or unconsciously, just simply because they thought it's cute. So dogs that sort of moved their eyebrows just had an advantage.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just get attracted to that cute face.
Yes. Yeah.
And well, and as soon as you say that, I right away think, I know if I was looking at a dog, it'd be stuck between sad or concerned, right? Like is the dog, or assessing, just focusing and looking and taking it all in, not necessarily sad or anything.
Yeah, concerned or attentive, I think is also what I hear a lot. So which is also interesting because it's an eyebrow movement that we also produce when we are communicating to each other. So I'm doing it all the time. I can even feel it. So I'm like, when we are using it with each other, when we want to emphasize something. So when we are saying something that we really want the other person to attend to. So then we are going all sort of crazy with our eyebrows. We see it in other humans as a sign of attention, or she's listening, she's really paying attention to what I'm saying. She's really engaged in the conversation. So it could be that we kind of, in some sense, basically put that on dogs and said, okay, that's an attentive dog because I see the eyebrow movement, which doesn't necessarily mean that dogs that don't use their eyebrows are not attentive. But for some reason, we might have sort of simply selected for this a bit more because it's familiar to us. It's something that we see as a sign of attention in other humans. And that's why we kind of also want to see it in a dog's face.
So you're making me think. So I think it would be obviously different dogs. It would to me, it seems like different dogs use it more or not. Like I've really noticed some dogs have eyebrow action a bit and some don't.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Is it that's what I was thinking about, the different breeds. It's so much harder, I guess, even in the hairier ones and stuff too. You can't.
Yeah, true. In the hairy ones, it's just simply very difficult to see. So that doesn't necessarily mean they're not doing it. You just can't see it because the hair covers the movement. But what we saw in the original study that we did is we had different breeds of dogs, and we saw that we had one husky. And huskies are considered a more ancient breed, so genetically more closely related to the wolf than other breeds, which we consider as more modern, like the Labrador, for example, is a very modern breed. So genetically further away from the wolf than the Malamute or the husky or these kinds of breeds. And that husky looked very wolf-like. So it's very possible that this is a more recent thing in these kinds of modern breeds that we in some sense bred more recently. And but we don't know that yet. We need more data and more research to look at that.
What about I know it's so fascinating. It really is. It's a fascinating topic. I love it. Is there an actual correlation, or have you studied the actual correlation of a dog getting more facial interaction with people, it coming out more? Like, what I was saying, like when I smile, I don't think it's my imagination. I think that my dog learned to smile because we always smile. The ones who do.
No, we have not. So we have not yet studied. So what we are looking at the moment is basically facial movements in puppies, and we are trying to follow them in a kind of longitudinal way. So we are basically seeing the puppy as it grows up to see if the facial movements develop, or is it something, do they have a set of facial movements that they produce from the very beginning, or does it come out more over time? So that would then suggest that there might be room for learning, so that aspects of this need to be learned. And then if there is room for learning, then that would be the next interesting step to see, okay, so can we actually teach facial movements to dogs? Can we actually teach meaning? So in some sense, can we teach a dog to produce certain facial movements if they want a specific thing? So for example, if they want a toy, they produce a certain facial movement, and if they want food, they produce a different one. So does it have this level of flexibility? That also be a really interesting question. Is it, so that would eyebrow movement question, whether they really understand to some extent that it has this effect on us. So we don't know that at the moment.
It's so fascinating, because I would swear that I have a couple dogs that learn smiling. One, I think, in my opinion, this is my opinion, and I like you say, I don't even know if it doesn't mean to them what it does to me, for sure. It's not the same meaning,
yeah,
but it's a connection. And I know the one, he's starting to get more, they're going back farther, and he's getting the little
yes,
curl now sometimes.
yeah.
I just know that they do respond. I 100% know that they respond to my reaction to them. And yeah, they just studying and learning your dog. And you never, just even studying the face, you can learn so much.
Yes, I definitely you can, and I think it's really important also to keep these things in mind, because it's so, as I say, it's the basis for our relationship. I think it's a very unique relationship. There's no other relationship like it, and the dog is specifically prepared for this relationship. And I think understanding that and understanding all the aspects of that is really important to kind of also appreciate the degree of this.
Because I'm constantly saying, like, your dog wants to connect with you. Your dog is
Yes.
sitting there waiting and wanting, and I believe, like, lots of times it's even just a glance, that if they're not getting that recognition, then they're not going to look for it. They're going to be doing something else. Like, instead, when they're sitting there and they are trying to connect, and people, I like to tell people, smile at your dog.
Yeah,
Smile
no, I
at your
think
dog.
there's research out there which I always find really powerful, where they basically compared dog puppies and wolf puppies, and they gave the puppies a choice, and the puppies could choose between a strange human, so a person they had never seen before, and a strange dog. So the wolves chose the dog, so that whatever is more conspecific, more like them. The dogs, the dog puppies chose the human. So for humans, for dogs, we are their preferred social partner if they have the choice. So they want to be with us, and I think that's super powerful, and that's something to keep in mind when you're interacting with your dog.
That's actually huge.
Yes.
That's very huge. They are. I feel like they want to be with you, and connect, and want you to understand, and I will forever be looking at eyebrows differently now. I know I will. And
Sorry
it's
for
like,
that.
no, I think it's great. I
Mm.
don't know if I can fix that light there. No. But yeah, it's so fascinating. So I'm trying to think of what else, other way we could help dog owners to, I don't know. Is there any, like, tip that you try and help people to understand this, that the dog does want to? That was just a great one right there, that puppies will choose an adult, a
Yes.
human, over another dog, immediate, a stranger. That's actually quite huge, and they just want to be with you. And
And then I think there's another powerful line of evidence out there which kind of underlines this, and that's research around the fact that dogs actually produce oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone that we produce. It's basically a hormone that kind of prepares us for bonding with our child. So it's a hormone that all mammals produce. So it's not a human specific thing. It's a mammal thing. So and it's kind of comes into play when you're bonding with your children, with your offspring. Okay, so and the way it's a kind of a cycle. So basically the way it works, oversimplified, is you look your child in the eyes and you produce oxytocin, and that oxytocin makes you want to attend to your child even more. So it's kind of this loop of this positive loop of this hormone is coming, so I want to attend to my offspring, and by looking at my offspring, I'm producing even more of that hormone, and that keeps in this constant cycle of so much attention. Okay, that's how it works, and that's how nature wants it to work. Okay, so that's the kind of. But now the really fascinating thing is that we now know that dogs produce that hormone when they look into human eyes. So when they see human faces and human eyes, they produce oxytocin. And that's, I think, the really interesting part, it's the other way around as well. So humans produce oxytocin when they look into their dog's eyes. And what is, for me, quite powerful again, is that we do not necessarily see that same cycle when you have wolves interacting with people, even if those people have raised them. So even if those people are their keepers or their parents or whatever you want to call it, not the same cycle. But with dogs, we have it in place. So whenever your dog looks at you and looks into your eyes, they're actually feeling this wave of love, if you want to put it that way. So so it's a constant cycle, and it works both ways, and that's quite fascinating.
So the love that you feel that you're giving to your
Yes.
dog, with all the good things that you feel your dog gives you, your dog is getting that too when you're getting
by
that
looking
connection,
at you and establishing this positive kind of engaging interaction. Yes.
Oh, you make my eyes water with that. That's nice to know, because dogs are important to me, and helping them to connect with their owners, and like I say, I don't getting people to stay in the dogs to stay in their homes, and people to just learn them, and if they're having troubles with something, get help to understand their dog.
Yes.
And not just giving up and taking them to a shelter or giving them away. It's oh my,
always take always be aware the dog wants to bond. So it wants to bond, it wants to be with you, it wants to have this relationship. It's basically made to have this relationship. So it's born to have this relationship. So if there's something not working, seek help and try and find out what you could possibly change to let this relationship
and
develop.
sometimes, like I was discussing before, it's just a small misunderstanding.
Yes.
Right, a dog is doing something and you think it means this, and it's 100% not that at all. And that's really powerful. I love the studies. That's an interesting work you're doing. Oh my gosh. I'd love to have current up. I'll definitely have to keep up with what you're doing, because that's just fascinating. Lots of great information to share with people and dog owners, and to help them connect with their dog and realize that their dog is trying to connect with them all the time. Right there, wants to be, and it's proof.
Yes.
You've got proof.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
Can't beat that. I really appreciate you coming today. Did you?
You're most welcome.
Was there anything else you wanted to add, or?
No, I think I've said everything.
I could probably keep you here all day. I really appreciate it. I'll stop the recording, but Dr. Juliane Kaminski, that was just fantastic. Thank you for all that great info for dog owners, listen to this again and catch all the great ideas and tips and how it's going to help you.